let's be honest, Bryce Young's disappointing. What has been built around him is falling apart. Will Levis shown some flashes, but the consistency's not there. With those two young quarterbacks under center, have you got any hope for anything fantasy relevant in these two games?
It's tricky because on paper, the Panthers' defense aren't a particularly fruitful one for opposing teams. But that's more because teams tend to get a lead on them and then they're just not pushed whatsoever. Carolina, on paper, allow the fourth fewest quarterback fantasy points, the fifth fewest wide receiver fantasy points, the fourth fewest slot wide receiver fantasy points, the ninth fewest tight end fantasy points. But where they've absolutely hemorrhaged points has been running backs because teams build up that lead and just able to run all over them, and they allow the second most running back fantasy points. So this feels like the kind of week where we should be getting a vintage Derrick Henry performance if there's one of those left in the tank. I mentioned earlier that Tajay Spears has seen 30 touches over the last 4 games. So he is mixing into a point which has been uncomfortable for Derrick Henry. After the last 2 games, Derrick Henry combined for less than 9 PPR points. That was after 3 consecutive games over 16. So maybe it's to get the right spot he needs. I'm not expecting Will Levis to go off a lot. He scored those 26 points in his debut, but then took him 3 games to pass that total across 3 combined performances. So I think you can start DeAndre Hopkins if you need. I think you can start Tajay Spears as a dart throw. Derrick Henry, I'd start with confidence. On the Carolina side, we saw Miles Sanders suddenly become much more involved again, and that feels like it was noteworthy because Frank Reich took over calling plays again, and Miles Sanders had his most snaps since week 5. Adam Thielen had his most productive fantasy game in several weeks, back to being a top 20 wide receiver again. And that feels like this is where the Panthers can have success against the Titans, because Tennessee allow 5th most fantasy points to opposing slot receivers. But outside of that, there's no point taking dart throws on Chigozie Okonkwo. There's no point worrying about DJ Chark or Jonathan Mingo because they're just not very good players and they're not getting it done whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with this Carolina team is that their offensive line is so bad. They aren't allowing Bryce Young any time to push the ball down the field. Like his time to throw is ridiculously slow. He's attempting less than 6% of passes more than 20 yards downfield, which is the lowest amount in the league by a big distance. Will Levis is over 25% of those passes attempted 20 yards downfield. And there's no sign of that improving. This is the kind of game I can see where Mike Vrabel is just going to sit those safeties in the box and say, try and beat us deep. We don't think you've got it in you. And I think that this could get ugly fast. And it's going to be a Tennessee, hopefully vintage game with Derrick Henry running out the clock because they're 2 scores up.
Yeah, and going back to your point about the offensive line, both starting guards are going to be out for the Panthers this week. Losing key interior line players like that, it's one thing on the tackles, but if you're getting pressure in your face straight away for a short quarterback like Bryce Young, who we've definitely seen at times his height has been an issue in the NFL, it just feels like it's going to get very, very miserable for him on Sunday.
Yeah, we saw the Saints consistently build around Drew Brees by investing over the odds at center and guard because they knew that he needed a clean pocket to step up in order to operate. Bryce Young's not even getting close to that right now.